I'm extending Hitler's cause. I'm fighting for it still today.
Words of hate.
Yeah, I love intimidating people, you know.
Reprehensible opinions. Does the First Amendment force us to tolerate intolerable speech? That's today's question.
This is Freedom Speaks, dedicated to First Amendment rights, with analyst John Sigenthaler and moderator Carrie Brock.
Say what you want, the First Amendment has you covered, and that's pretty solid advice, but it only goes so far, because when opinions are offensive, when words are used as weapons, your constitutional shield may be thinner than you think.
Martin Luther said, fags are beasts. Why have you turned the church over to the beast? Beware!
The Reverend Fred Phelps can say anything he wants, thanks to the First Amendment.
St. David! Fag church!
But if his words provoke a fight, they could land him in jail.
In my case, I'm walking down the street, and he looks at me and yells, sodomite, and then fat, ugly sodomite, and then repeats the phrase again. Now, you call somebody a fat, ugly queer on the streets of Kansas, you can expect a fight.
Attorney Jerry Palmer is suing to shut Phelps up, saying his words would make any reasonable person want to fight.
Those red doors are the way to hell.
But a case against speech will not be easy to win because Reverend Phelps' words have not caused a physical confrontation. In Oregon, the situation, though, is much different.
They want me.
White supremacist Tom Metzger's racist rhetoric got him in trouble back in 1990. In a civil suit, a jury decided Metzger's words prompted these three skinheads to murder an Ethiopian student. As punishment for his speech, Metzger was ordered to pay the victim's family $5 million.
I love Colin Ferguson.
Nation of Islam member Khalid Muhammad publicly condones the actions of a murderer. The crowd cheers him on.
God spoke to Colin Ferguson and said, I want you to catch the Long Island train today. Let the church say amen. Let the church say
This
amen
is a
again.
textbook case of freedom of speech in action. Muhammad can say just about whatever he wants, as long as nobody commits a crime as a direct result of what he says.
We don't outlaw ideas in this country, even outrageous ideas, even advocacy of violence we don't outlaw in this country, unless it's likely to incite imminent harm to somebody.
We have found 8 bodies.
8 people died, including the suspect, after a shooting and fire in Harlem. It began with a heated protest. Picketers passed out these flyers and hurled racial slurs against a Jewish store owner who wanted to take over a black-owned store next door. Many believe the protesters' angry speech led to the tragedy.
I think that probably it did prompt the individual to do the crime. I don't think there's any question about that. I think the question with which we must deal is, should that speech have been legally prevented?
Did you shoot them?
In North Carolina, 3 white soldiers are accused of killing an African-American couple. Police found white supremacist literature and a Nazi flag in one of the soldiers' belongings. And now police call the murders hate crimes. In 35 states, crimes that stem from hate speech result in tougher penalties. And some think that's unconstitutional.
To punish someone for speech which might have led to harm, that's a square First Amendment problem that the Constitution prohibits. It doesn't allow for guesswork.
And on our panel today to talk about this, Nadine Strossen. She is president of the American Civil Liberties Union. And Nadine thinks hate speech is part of the price we pay for our freedom. Dr. Amitai Etzioni joins us, a sociology professor at George Washington University. Dr. Etzioni says it's all right for society to make some rules. And they are joined today by our First Amendment analyst, John Sigenthaler. Dr. Etzioni, let's start with you first. Rules to curb hate speech? What rules?
Well, first of all, we must start with a recognition that the best way to protect freedom of speech is to realize that in a civil society, all values need to be balanced by others. There are no absolute rights. And there's a 3-part to the agenda we need to follow here. First of all, we need to draw the distinction between a legal right to say offensive things, hateful things, and the rightness, the moral rightness of saying them. And we need to establish the clear understanding that you may say things, but I may protest and excommunicate and remove you from my community for saying these things. Second, there are already in place a whole network of informal rules which control what we put on the media. There is a right to speech, but not an obligation to publicize hate. So, for instance, you will not show on this camera frontal nudity. There are other things we have to put on the list of things we will not publicize, not through legal mechanisms, but through these understandings we have with each other. So there is a moral distinction, informal mechanism, and some adjustment in law.
Let me give Nadine a chance to answer that. He suggests civility, and what's wrong with that civility?
There is no fire.
Dr. Etzioni, let me stop you for just a moment.
Should we move over this marker a bit and include more words in this third category? So there is a moral distinction, informal mechanism, and some adjustment in law.
Let me give Nadine a chance to answer that. He suggests civility, and what's wrong with that civility?
There's nothing wrong with civility if it is, in fact, a matter of voluntarism, peer pressure, determinations by the media themselves as to what they are not going to put on. All of those examples are exercises of free speech. And I fully agree with Dr. Etzioni at what he seems to be saying, that the appropriate response to speech we disagree with or find offensive or hateful or wrong is not to ask the government to censor it, but for us as private citizens and members of organizations to raise our own voices to protest and denounce the ideas conveyed by that speech.
But what would be wrong with just a little bit of forced respect, John?
I don't want anybody enforcing respect when I have something I want to say. And my problem is that if my right to speak is chilled because someone disagrees with what I say, then yours may be. You may have some point of view that's totally different from my own. I just wondered when Dr. Etzioni made that third point, he said some adjustments in the law. I totally agree with his first 2 points. But when he said some adjustments in the law, it sounded to me as if he were getting too close to that line that says Congress should make no law.
Well, the specific example...
We already have laws in place, as I mentioned, concerning shouting fire at a theater.
Right.
But there are many others. When we meet in a room like this to conspire to commit a crime, we haven't done anything yet. We're just talking. The slightest crossing that line is a crime. So the question is like this. When people meet in a public library in San Francisco to conspire, to exchange tips, how old men are going to seduce boys 8 years or younger, that is too close to action. I think we can cover these kind of words when there's, just the way we heard earlier, if you incite for fighting. These are still words, but they're so close to action. We can use this criteria as saying we will not defend the right of people to conspire to seduce children.
Is that the right kind of example he's using?
I think the falsely shouting fire in a theater is a better example, and what it illustrates is a point that R.B. Quinn made earlier, and that is our law appropriately demands that in order for words to be punished, they have to be, first of all, intentionally directed to producing action that is itself illegal, and secondly, they have to be likely to imminently produce that action. If you talk about people sitting around in a room and, you know, having ugly fantasies about doing something that we would all find abhorrent, that does not necessarily satisfy that very close and demanding standard of intentional incitement of imminent unlawful conduct.
Dr. Etzioni, it's my understanding you take exception to some things you're hearing in the media these days. For example, recently